We do have a live read-through on our YouTube channel where we read 50 chapters of it, so you can read it along with us. And here are, what are they called? Not emotions. Here are expressions.
Thoughts?
Reactions.
AoA, that's a triple play. New episodes, I couldn't wait. Yeah. Open your mind at the first gate. Press play, no need to debate. AoA, check me out. Look, plugged in, you can catch the hype. Golden Dawn, how we follow the light. Anime like life, married to it, my wife.
What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages? Welcome back to the AoA show. I am your host, as always, Ian, along with my boys Isaiah.
Yo, yo, yo.
And Gavin.
What is Gucci shoes?
And today we're here to talk about Noblesse, but not Noblesse the Manhwa, Noblesse the OVA.
Oh.
So we were told that they said, you know what, screw it. We're going to jam the entirety of season 1 of Noblesse
Quite literally.
into 30 minutes. We were like, an hour? No. And Isaiah was like, hold my beer. I got it in 30. Insane. But so, because we were debating on picking up the show, or at least trying to experiment with it. I know it's been something that's heavily requested amongst viewers. And we really did enjoy the webtoon. It's just that you got to like pay for all the, preceding chapters and all that kind of jazz. So we were like, all right, I think this is a perfect launching point. We'll pick up what we missed in the webtoon, and then if we want to watch it, hopefully we'll be up to speed. So we're here today to talk about our initial impressions on the film, I guess, or whatever, OVA. Yeah, at this point, and what we thought about it, if it lived up to the webtoon, if we're excited now from watching that to hop into season 1 of the show when it airs, and all that kind of stuff. But you guys know the drill. If you guys enjoy the content today, make sure you guys are liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, sharing with your friends, and commenting your thoughts down below. What did you think of this discussion? Did you watch the OVA? Did you enjoy it? Did you not watch it? Do you feel inclined to watch it now? Let us know all those thoughts down below. But anyway, I have one word to say for this. Fast. Like, holy crap, was this like, dude, they got a high school, I don't even think had like that. Well, I mean, granted, they had 13 episodes to do a season, but still, like, wow, that was so fast. That was insane. I felt, and we were actually talking about this before we got on air here. We were wondering if watching the webtoon, well, at least I was wondering, I'm still on the fence, whether reading the webtoon had made the watching experience more enjoyable or less. And I'm like kind of on the fence, because I'm like, okay, I'm glad that we read what we read, because it let me actually understand who these characters are that they show in the OVA, and kind of what their motivations were, at least on a very surface level. And we kind of got some of that backdrop stuff, because they skipped like a lot of the comedic parts and all that. And so it was nice to be able to get that, and it's a little more fleshed out. So it's like, I appreciate that now going into the OVA, and I'm like, okay, if something's rushed, it's like I could fill in the blanks with what we already read. So it's not too big of a deal. But on the flip side, I don't know if it was actually a deterrent, because I then get kind of mad, you know what I mean? And like, kind of like a lot of the commenters and watchers of these animes who have read the webtoon, and they're like, dude, like the webtoon just did so much better. Yada, yada, yada. Like, I feel like I'm in the same, I'm kind of in a similar boat with that off of just one OVA episode. Because it was just like, I couldn't imagine if I hadn't read the webtoon. I think I very well may have been lost, to be honest, with this one, because it was just so much going on and so fast. Like, we didn't even have a second to breathe, But I don't know. I'm still torn. I don't know if it was I don't know if it enhanced my watching experience or if it detracted from it. And I'm still like in the air. I don't know. What'd you guys think about it?
So it's tough, because I actually feel like they couldn't have done it any better, especially with what they had in fitting a whole season of that manhwa in one episode, and a 30-minute episode at that. And honestly, it kind of makes me feel like Got a High School, for example, has no excuse for being able to like really like wrench it that bad, because like, bro, I'm not even gonna say it. These people made this whole I didn't say it, but they took this whole first season of a manhwa and put it in one episode. And even though we did read it and have all of the like precursor knowledge and all the character development that they had, brought up for the first 50 chapters and such, but even then, looking at it, like trying not to add the information that we know, I feel like if I watched that, it would have been an info blast, yes. But then again, I also feel like they didn't they didn't reach any plot points, in my opinion, that would have made it to be where I needed extra detail compared to what we already know. Because let's be real, we already knew from the beginning that they were vampires. They gave a little couple first pages of words, kind of explaining a little bit of what they do, and then from there it's okay, they're vampires. So that kind of implies they have stupid powers. They can do superhuman things, and then what is going to happen? So I feel like even with that little bit of information, for me, if I hadn't read it, yes, it would have been a lot going on, and you would feel the rush 100%. I also feel like I would have been able to enjoy it, comparatively speaking, be sitting there and be like, I don't understand anything I watched. I feel like I could have gotten the gist from it, although rushed, and actually been okay with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it really boils down for, in my opinion.
For sure.
Okay. I definitely... So I liked it, but it's weird because I'm trying to, in my head... I kind of have this thing of what you were saying, where it's wow, Noblesse summed up their whole. Now, granted, God of High School, as far as a webtoon, has more material in season 1 to go through, so I will give them that. But I can't help but think I'm okay. So I'm trying to think of all the things that they cut and of the story that season 1 tells, right? And is anything that they took out imperative as a viewer that you need to know going in season 1? And are the things that they either changed or rearranged so different that it alters any of the characters' perspectives, or that it changes any characters' motivations or anything like that? And I think if the task was to sum this up in 30 minutes, it's not bad. I really think they did a pretty good job. I think that one of the biggest things, and I say biggest with air quotes, things for me as far as oh, that was weird. Was the speed that they went at, because they were they were this is 30 minutes. When that timer hits 29 minutes and 29 or 59 seconds, we're done. But again, I feel a lot of the character changes and motivations and scenes that were done differently right from the webtoon. I actually don't think were done so differently in a way that it takes out or takes away any of the original character intentions or motivations from the webtoon. You still get who M24 and M21 are, and they actually sort of spill that bowl a little bit earlier obviously due to time's sake. You still get the whole premise that even though they're a pseudo, vampire, demon people, whatever, and that they're part of the same team that the other two people are, that they're not cool with each other, right? And they make enough references to the organization, so that there's some bigger thing at play here. You sort of get the feeling that I think actually, now I'm literally thinking about it, that's my biggest thing with the OVA is it does just enough to give you the vibes of what everybody's relationships and what their motivations are. Now, being somebody who's read the webtoon, I can't help but have that pre-knowledge going in, so it was easier for me to piece together because I already knew most of the stuff. I can imagine for somebody who's just tuning in the first time, I feel you would get the story. It's just a manner of literal scenes and things happened, either much quicker or at a much in a different way. For example, we were talking about the fights between some of the fights, the way that they're orchestrated either didn't happen that way in the webtoon, or it was at a different place, or different. Not everybody that was involved in the OVA of a certain fight was involved in the webtoon version of the fight. But again, I don't think that takes away anything from those fights or from those characters. You still understand who Frankie is. You still understand who he is to Rai. You still understand who Rai is. Now, again, I think it's a weird thing because while I think you understand it, the webtoon, for obvious reasons, can and does do a much better job of connecting you to these characters and getting you to feel one of the things I remember when we were watching that we were sort of bummed out that they cut out was the video game scene between Rai and all his friends. And while I would agree that that's in no way a pivotal scene, you don't need that to understand who Rai is or understand who Suwoo or any of those characters are. It is, I think, necessary to connect to those characters more, to really get a feel for how they interact on a day-to-day, what their relationship is with each other, where their heads are at. Because there's a lot of moments where Rai will be looking at the kids in the OVA and just smile, and he's I like these guys. And in my head, I'm why? I don't really, you haven't really interacted with it. It doesn't feel like you've talked to them enough to like really like them. Now, I guess you could be making the play of like, well, he's looking at it as in like, oh, these humans. I like humans. Like they seem to be fun. And again, a lot of the stuff that I think was cut out of this OVA doesn't feel like it was cut out as in it's no longer part of the story. It just happened off screen, which I think is a different distinction from something like God High School, which seemed to have just altogether taken things out of the story, as in those like closed the gap. Those moments didn't happen, which like sucks because off screen is sort of, you know, the next best thing to didn't happen at all. But I think off screen, again, it did happen, right? Like that video game scene did happen. We didn't get to see it, which is like kind of the nail in the coffin there as far as building character, you know, connections and growth. But it did happen. Those characters did have that moment. And so, I don't know, I kind of feel like I'm splitting hairs here, but like I really liked it. I think it's just very hard. It would be very hard for me to recommend this to somebody who hasn't read the webtoon.
Yeah, dude, I feel very valid points. And I don't disagree, but I do think that Noblesse has two large advantages. If we're comparing this to something like the God of High School, which really is the best reference for anyone out there that's like, really, you're just picking on God of High School? Like, being that A, we just finished it, and B, they're in a similar scenario, as in they're pretty rushed, right? But I feel like Noblesse benefits from the fact that what we did see, the plot points are very simplistic. Whereas something like God of High School, there is a literal supernatural, heavenly hell, like a literal war going on between like gods and things that we just don't know of. Like there's so many different people within the plot, within the story, from the cult members to every single person as part of the Six, you know, this, that, and the third. Whereas Noblesse, in my opinion, definitely has a strength in the sense that everything that they covered so far doesn't have to be really fleshed out for you to be like, to enjoy it. Like you don't really have to know yet who the organization is, right? You don't have to know too much. And so like when these things are cut out or expedited at an incredibly fast speed, it's not quite as jarring, at least in my perspective, because it's like, okay, I guess I don't need to know much about that yet. Whereas something like God of High School, it was like with the whole Chariot God thing, like that is the show, right? So it's like you kind of have to know what's going on there. So when things get expedited, it feels like more of a gut punch, in my personal opinion. Number two, I don't know how many chapters the first season of Noblesse is.
90, I think.
90?
We
okay.
read 50, and I think people said there was about 40 more.
Gotcha. So 90 chapters. God of High School is 120. Again, they had 13 episodes. They had one. But I do feel that Noblesse, at least from what we've read, is relatively slow, at least where it is right now in terms of like webtoon. It's not like super fast paced. It's a very slow burn at the start, which I'm fine with. That's not a complaint. That's it's good in some ways because I get to flesh out the characters and stuff. But point being is when it gets translated, I know even some people said this when we went through our read through of the webtoon, that they were saying, you know what, it actually might benefit from a bit of a speed up in the anime, being that the webtoon is a little slow. And I couldn't agree more, to be honest with you. And I think this was like, if you want to talk about a speed up, holy crap. But I do feel that all things considered, because Noblesse is generally a little bit slower to kind of like get its foot off the ground, it's not quite as, you know, much of a low blow, the fact that they cut a lot of things, because the things that they did cut were like very side style stuff. I will say though that it was like, I can't help but think it's like, it's the issue here. It's like once you read the webtoon, or at least the 50 chapters that we did, it's impossible for me to now try and look at this through the lens of like, well, what if I didn't watch the webtoon? Because I have. It's like impossible for me to get that thought out of my mind, and hindsight's 2020. So I really can't help but think watching or reading the webtoon was a pivotal factor in me enjoying this as much as I did, which isn't like 10 out of 10, but again, like if I didn't read the webtoon, I would have been like, this is dope for like the action and all that kind of stuff going on. But in terms of like, I'm in this for the long haul because of plot, I'm not going to lie, I would not be sold. I don't think, again, hindsight 2020, I don't believe that I would be really sold. I'd be like, this is cool. Maybe we could look into it, but I'm not like chomping at the bit to understand what happens.
Well, you know what's interesting is because I've been trying to think, I'm like, okay, God of High School did what it did, and you know, for all intents and purposes, personally, I didn't like how they did it. Noblesse did a very similar thing with sort of cramming its entire season into an expedited version, but I did I did like it. I did walk away liking it. And so I've been trying to sit here and I'm thinking like, all right, well, what is the difference then? Like what did what? And I think at the end of the day, something you brought up is sort of the key. And it's that like Noblesse didn't sacrifice any of its plot in order to tell this expedited version. Like you still, every story element that you get from the webtoon is still here.
I don't think it had to.
They don't.
Is the thing. And that's what I was saying.
They could have, and they didn't, is my point.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
Has a story that it's telling, but like God of High School story, you need to know like A, B, and C of all these plot points in order to get the story, and they just didn't.
Well, that's my thing. If Noblesse was more jam packed, as in there was more material to cover, and it wasn't as slow to start, they wouldn't have a choice but to cut some of those important story elements. You're saying that they could have. Well, obviously they would opt not to if they, you know what I mean, if that's pertinent information, and they have the ability to cram it in, which they did, although it was like going on a bullet train. What I'm saying is, again. And I don't know. I don't want to make the whole discussion about comparing this to God of High School because it's its own entity. Although the comparison is relevant, I understand. But I guess all I'm saying is like I feel like Noblesse, again, I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it, whatever. I'm just saying I feel like it had more to work with in that it had more fat to trim without it really being that relevant. They could kind of slice those sides.
Yeah, well, hold on. I want to add something because it's similar to what Isaiah's saying. And I agree with what you're saying. However, I feel like what's important is at the tail end of when we watch this show and us finishing the first episode and saying all plot points irrelevant at this moment. At when we finished each one, did we want to go back and look at the reference material? And for Noblesse, after watching it, like Isaiah said, I actually enjoyed it and I would want to. And at the end of God of High School, quite frankly, I couldn't have cared less if we read it or not, and so did Isaiah. And even at the end of the 13 episodes, it was all jumbled. Now, regardless, I really couldn't care less on how many plot points they had to hit to tie it all together. However, our main contention from the get-go was that they clearly just didn't execute it properly. And that even goes with us now picking up the manhwa and reading it and now seeing it in its actual form and how it originated. And we're like, wow, that was actually really cool how they did that. Like, and that's the thing. And it makes more sense. I really just feel like they just dropped the execution in terms of how they developed the anime. And if they did clean it up a little bit better, they would have been able to hit more plot points with trimming off more fat. For example, a whole episode dedicated to Mira's wedding. Honestly, I could have dealt without that. And that gives you a whole nother episode, which this show literally just crammed the whole season. And, so I think capability wise, if they just executed it properly, I personally think it's not an excuse that there's there's so many relevant points. Like, look at Tower of God. I feel like they did a pretty damn good job, and that had just as many relevant plot points. So I really just feel like it chops up to just poor execution at that end. And it's for different tastes. People are going to like it for different reasons. And arguably, you could say that Crunchyroll, they knew what they were making because they were teeing off to a different audience, whether they were just trying to hype up the fights with cool animation. That's not a problem. But however, if it's like pure story points to what they put together in the anime and why it fell through, I just feel like it was an execution flaw that could have been fixed if that was something that they were really focusing on. I just feel like Noblesse in this example were really focusing on how do we keep like almost important relevant plot points like the video game scene. Yes, it wasn't something that we had to physically see, but just even referencing it off screen and then coming back, even if you had no idea of what happened, you can only assume that, they did something as a group, like they're friends, they're together. We didn't even have that like camaraderie feeling. Like I remember watching out of high school and we're like, dude, they don't even know where each other live. Like they try to like connect them all, but if they feel so disconnected because nothing is ever referenced to like their personal lives, and it like that's what makes it kind of like their character development kind of back and forth and just their whole relationship. So I feel like if it was just toyed with differently, it would have just portrayed the story better. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. But Noblesse, I feel like just actually for what they had to accomplish, I think they did a very good job.
That's fair.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, again, again, it's opinion, so it's not that anyone's wrong or right. I respectfully disagree. I don't think the comparison is all that fair, especially since we have read the webtoon beforehand, and I think to me that made 100% of the difference. And I'm trying to bring myself out of this like as hard as I can, and being like, because I'm not gonna lie, low key watching that, even knowing the webtoon, I was like, all right, you know what I mean? Like I was like, that was all right. Like I don't know for a fact, but I am fairly certain that if we're talking about, is this a good enough advertisement for me to watch the webtoon? For me, that was not. But being that I've read the webtoon, I was able to, every single part that was off screen, I was able to immediately think back and understand everything to then connect the dot to the next part. So it didn't feel that I was like, it didn't feel rushed, even though it was. And I don't know. It's like, I know that I had that enhancement. So, you know, again, it's hindsight's 2020. So you can't, it's impossible for me to go back without that information. It's like, it's too late. I already know the info now. Well, that's my opinion. That's what's
funny is that, like, I've been, again, thinking in the terms of, like, because these, you know, these anime adaptations and the OVAs or all this stuff that, you know, we all know, like, they're not going to be panel for panel, beat for beat, the webtoon. They just can't. That's not how, it's not realistic. So something I've always talked about with Tower of God is like, okay, then you have to shift the way you adapt this story. So what you do then is you sell the story and not, like, the panels. I don't need you to tell me every beat what happens with Ryan and his friends. But in this 30 minutes, I do need you to sell this group of characters to me. I need you to make me care about wanting to get to know these characters. And I think Tower of God and things like Noblesse benefit a little bit more inherently because of the essence of their narrative is a little bit more like mystery-esque driven. So like you were saying before, there's beats, like there's things there's things that are meant to be hinted at and not told, right? So you're meant to be like, what was that?
Like the organization.
We'll find out. But I personally do feel like if I'm thinking about in expedited advertisement, that I do think this did a really good job. I do think that this sold me, and because I'm thinking back to like, all right, if I were to take the webtoon and cut out everything they did in the of the webtoon, everything they did in the OVA, you're essentially left with the OVA, right? Which is a lot of the action scenes, some of the fights put in different orders or different people in different places, but like those moments, you know, were undisputedly the hypest moments for me reading the webtoon. Was like seeing all those fights, was seeing who these the actual relationships between some of these characters, was seeing like the M21, 24 reveal that they're like, you know, not 100% like, you know, just, you know, regular bad guys, part of the organization, whatever. And I got all that out of the OVA. I feel like the OVA, if this was an advertisement to me to watch their anime, because this is the kind of stuff that's going to be in this anime, I personally am on board.
No, that's fair. Yeah. I mean, to each their own. I guess that's kind of the point of it. I'm kind of curious as to where we go from here. You know, again, we didn't read the last 40 chapters of the webtoon, so obviously I'm assuming they crammed the whole transformation thing between Jake and his female partner, because we saw a slight transformation of Jake in the webtoon, but not like that full-blown like Minotaur thingy. So, you know, I'm curious as to now in the webtoon how they did that and how that was fleshed out, because there, again, were a lot of scenes that were like, you know, smashed together or flipped or, you know, inverted and all that kind of thing. So I'm curious to see how that transformation comes fully about, and if he puts up like more of a fight against Frankenstein or something, because he initially fights Frankenstein. I'm curious to see all of those things personally, and like how we and where we go from here. Well, we're not, because he's dead. I mean, in the OVA, yeah, but I mean, like in the webtoon, I'm curious to see how that went up against it. And I guess the female's dead too. They just axed her, because in the webtoon seemed like she had like much more of this like mysterious vibe, and she didn't want to like fully reveal herself. And it was like, okay, I have a certain job to do, and my job's not to fight you right now, etc. So like different character motivations in some ways. But yeah, I'm curious to see where now they pick up with the second season, and I guess it's more of like the organization coming after them, or Rai specifically. I don't know.
I'm assuming wherever season 2 picks up, is probably where like the anime story starts.
Sure.
I mean, so I guess obviously the OVA was very aware that like these characters, so like Mark and the woman, like that it had to get rid of them right by the end of this, right?
Jake,
whatever the fuck his name is.
I was like, wait, which one's Mark?
I was thinking. I was like,
look, I know Frankie, Rai. That's it. As far as I'm concerned, and Shuwu, actually, I remember his name because he's dope. That's 3. That's it. But like, I feel like, so the OVA, again, in it being like, all right, we got to get from the beginning of season 1 all the way up to season 2, like for this anime, because that's where the anime starts. So if all the events of season 1, if those are the events of season 1, right? You have Rai and his group meeting Shinmu and his group. You have them meeting M21 and M24. You have them confronting Jake and the woman and like learning a little bit about the organization. And you have Jake and the woman dying, right? And M24. Sorry. Like if all those events happen in season 1, the OVA is like, all right, we have to do all of that then. We can't do it in the same order because it'll take too long. So, but we need those 3 characters to die. We need all of these characters to know each other, and we need everybody to be at this place by the end of the OVA. And so I feel like that's, I feel, again, for me, it's more of like different placement, same result, personally, where it's like, all right, we put these characters in different situations, but I don't think it muddles up the character motivations. I think everybody's character still stayed the same in terms of like what they wanted, what they were after, and like why they were doing it. None of the characters that we met seemed like, the only one that seemed a little bit different, quite frankly, is the woman, because like you were saying before in the webtoon, she does sort of go out of her way to be like, no, we got to take this very slow and cautious, because the webtoon has time to be slow and cautious. But so in the OVA, because the OVA is much more expedited, she's like, fuck that noise. We got to get, we got 2 minutes left or whatever. But I feel like, again, it's like you achieve these results by a different method, by going a different route. But if we get here and I'm like, for all the same, like still on board, that's fine with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough. Let's get into some final thoughts on the OVA. What we'd rate it. Do you think people should watch it? Compared to if they read the webtoon, do you think they should just read the webtoon? If they've read it, do you think they should watch it? Vice versa, all those scenarios, etc. Gavin, what do you think?
So I'd say if I do think if you were to watch it, that you should at least read like at least 50 chapters, what we did for free, because that's what they offer for free. And like, honestly, you would get a better viewing experience in then watching the OVA. So it just comes hand in hand with everything that we're talking about. If you do want to watch the OVA without watching the webtoon, know that it's just going to be a blast through and probably the craziest 30 minutes of your life. And you're gonna question life after. Not really, it's not that deep, but like it's a lot going on, so be ready for it. But I definitely recommend reading the webtoon first, at least to 50 chapters. I would give it on a rating. Let's see.
Maybe I could rephrase that question. My apologies. Instead of the rating, would you, if someone had not seen, or if someone has not read the webtoon and they're like, okay, I want to get into Noblesse, would you recommend this film to them and they're like, I want to watch this film? Would you recommend this film to watch to them? And do you think that someone who hasn't read the webtoon, that this film does a good enough job at selling the story of Noblesse, whether it be the webtoon or continuing into said season?
Oh yeah, I think that this OVA in itself would sell the story, and at the very least get you interested on what is supposed to happen, or at least intrigue you to look into these characters, like to get a better understanding of these characters. Because even in like even when they hit with one of my favorite scenes when they went to go eat the ramen and he was just having those flashbacks, like I know if I just saw that, I'd be like, I want to see that. And just like those little, like they still keep those little quirky moments that, in my opinion, is what made me like it to begin with, and in seeing that made me wanted to actually reread it and go back through it. So I think that it sells it pretty well and better than most shows, and I've got to actually applaud them for pulling that off, because I honestly thought it was going to be a lot worse than it actually was, especially when you cram 90 episodes or 90 chapters into one episode. So yeah, hats off to them, but I do think that it does a good job in at least selling the story and getting people interested in it.
What do you think, Isaiah?
I definitely liked it. I think to be honest, I'd probably give it a solid 8 out of 10.
I'm doing ratings.
Oh, well, fuck it. I just did it. I'm definitely curious, actually, like if somebody is watching this that hasn't read the webtoon, I would recommend you to watch it because I want to know like how well this actually tracks. But I personally do think that, again, it does sell the story well enough. I think if anything, I would recommend that you watch this OVA and then then read the webtoon, only because one of the things that you don't get from this OVA that I think obviously the manhwa can do much better is like the comedic, like sort of in between moments that all the characters have. I think one of the things that initially sold me on Noblesse was the comedy in a lot of the scenes, but it was like the way the characters thought about like each other and the world. Which, you know, there's like two scenes. There's the ramen scene, and then there's like the moment when Rai comes back to Frankenstein's house and he's talking to him about the, you know, when he went to go play video games. And then there's like the door scene when he first meets Frankenstein. Oh my God, yeah. But there's a lot more of those kinds of moments in the manhwa. So I definitely would recommend, like literally, even if you get the gist of the story, just going back for those moments, because those moments by themselves are just a whole nother treat. But I do think the OVA by itself, if you were just somebody who's like doesn't want to read the manhwa and you're like, I just want to watch this anime, but it says that it starts at season 2, like, is this enough? Yeah, I think it's enough. Oh,
and another little tidbit I have to add: if you do want to watch read, I should say, the manhwa and don't want to do it alone, we do have a live read through on our YouTube channel where we read 50 chapters of it, so you can read it along with us. And here are what are they called? Not emotions. Here are expressions.
Thoughts?
Reactions to it as we read it. Yeah, that's the word.
Like,
wow,
what is the word he's looking at?
I don't know. That was a brain fart, but you can read along and
this is why Ian does the plugs.
That's right. It was a valiant effort.
Dude, it's been a long day.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit of a different opinion for me, but again, this is why we're the AoA show. I think as a standalone film, if I was like, okay, you know, we're in the meeting room and it says, all right, we have 30 minutes. All right, you know what, if we have 30 minutes to sell this show, like this is all we have, I actually do think it did a good job within that 30 minutes, if that's all you had. And again, I guess down to time constraints, that is all they had. I would have really liked to see it be beyond 30 minutes because I do think overall, even though with the 30 minutes they had, they did it well, I don't think they did it in the grand scheme of things justice in what they could have done, or, you know, if they had the opportunity to make it maybe a little longer, flesh a couple things out. I'll be honest, full disclosure here, like Noblesse wasn't even on the radar until it was like for us, until we got a trailer. People like yourselves commented, said, hey, this is a thing, it's coming out. We go, okay, let's check it out. And then we go from there, we potentially read the webtoon. And then, you know, we by being pushed a little bit, kind of fall into the pool, as it were. And it's like, all right, I'm here. So it's either sink or swim. And then like we get into it and it's like, damn, kind of didn't know what I was missing. You know what I mean? Like the pool's kind of fun. But like, to be honest, for me to actually walk in the pool to begin with, you know, took that push. And I think if we're referring to this OVA as the push that we'd need beyond all the other external factors that I just mentioned, I personally don't think it would be enough for me to be like, yo, out of all of the anime out there, out of all the things, out of all the recommendations I'm getting, out of all the trailers dropping, all that kind of stuff, that I'd be like, out of those sifting through, watch this and be like, this is the one. You know, like this is the one I want to dedicate the next X amount of hours to my life to, because life is short and we don't have all that kind of time. So it's very selective process when it comes to that sort of thing. And I don't think that this by itself was enough to make me be like, I'm willing to put in that time to like fully flesh out the story. That's my personal opinion. I do think if you watch the webtoon, or I'm sorry, I keep on doing that. If you read the webtoon, you're at a great advantage because then you kind of, again, get to piece together and understand what that means. And like, you kind of, you know, you're able to kind of like skip those stones, as it were, and be like, oh yeah, that was great. And like relive some of those funny moments and things like that. And I do think it would be enough for most people to sell it on them, because I think it's action packed. The plot is pretty simplistic in terms of the OVA. The story's pretty straightforward. So, you know, a lot of people will probably just be turned on to this by the cool fight scenes, the moments of comedy, and Rai himself, because he's kind of a G, and some of these characters are pretty likable. But I don't think in terms of like a thick and convoluted plot, or not convoluted, but a thick and like rich plot. And if you were like, I'm looking for a show like that, don't think it does it. I would probably give the film as a standalone probably around a 6, I would say. And I do think that you should watch it, all things considered, though.
Well, now we have to get Gavin's rating because we both did ratings and you told him not to do a rating.
Fair enough. I figured, well, you did it, and I was like, all right, I might as well. We'll go back to you, Gavin. But yeah, I think the film as a standalone, if you just wanted to watch like a 30-minute OVA and you're like, this is pretty dope, yeah, I actually think it's good. You know, like I said, the 30 minutes that they did give him, they did a pretty damn good job, like with everything that they had. That's like giving somebody a wrench and they're like, build a house. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, like they did pretty damn good job. So I do think that you should watch it, and hopefully it entices you to read it because it is pretty great. But my hopes aren't incredibly high for most people. Gavin, give us a rating and then end us off.
Ooh, I will rate it at 7.5. I think that is a good number, and it bridges the two. And if you don't watch this OVA, then Rye is not going to show up at your house. So I didn't threat. I made a tantalizing offer.
Well, that is a threat because we do want Rye to show up at our house.
Rye is kind of a G, I have to say. Rye is kind of a G. Anyway, listen, folks, those are our opinions. Those are our thoughts on the matter. Again, let us know in the comments down below what you thought of this film, if you've seen it already. If you haven't, do you think you're going to watch it now? And do you think it does its job in selling the story of Noblesse? But until next time, thank you so much for watching. Smash that like button, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Later.
Peace.
Ninjas are samurais, blaze of the kunais. Find me in the leaf of the cloud, screaming out Bankai. We just some ghouls though, who like seeing parts fly.